What's up, everybody? It's your girl, Danie. I hope you all are doing well as well could be, given the current circumstances in the state of our world. It is scary out here. And so I thought a mental health check-in was in order. A couple of weeks ago, I was able to sit down with Simone Donaldson, clinical social worker, consultant, and owner of Agapé Consulting and Therapy, and we were able to chat mental health. I found it personally very beneficial, very informative, very relatable. She gave some really great insights that I think you all will benefit from, and that's the goal. I hope that you guys take something away from that helps you guys during these times. It's a long one, so make sure you grab some popcorn, some snacks, cuddle up with a buddy, a friend, whatever, and enjoy. Check it out. Hi, Simone. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So we're going to be talking about mental health. We're doing a mental health check-in. You're going to be sharing your expertise with us. And first of all, we want to clarify some things. I know a lot of people, we talk about mental health and mental illness increasingly as if they're the same thing, but they're not. So can you explain the difference for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when we think of mental health, it's very similar to looking at physical health. And that really is just about stability. It's about wellness, finding balance within our mental and emotional being, versus mental illness, where it's much more about disturbances in our emotions and our thoughts and the inability sometimes to function as a result of that. So they're very two different things. However, I do see how people use it interchangeably. Right. And I think that's also because people's language around mental health in general is limited, which makes sense because there's also a lot of stigma around mental health. And so I think people really struggle to take the time to understand it, and or just in general, the way society sometimes presents it. Yeah. If mental health on its own is a problem, but in fact it's very much a part of us being whole, and so taking care of that as much as our physical health is very important.
Right? Absolutely, yeah.
Just to even mention, when we think about mental health challenges, so I feel like you could have mental health, you could have mental health challenges, and you could have mental illness, right? So as a Black woman, as an example, like a mental health challenge may be something like imposter syndrome, right? So unfortunately,
yes.
Right? I'm sure you know that way too well yourself. And, the reality is of kind of feeling like, oh my God, do I belong here? There's constant feeling of rejection and feeling like I have to look professional and whatnot. It's a constant mental health challenge that I'm dealing with, regardless of my years in the field. So mental health challenge might be me going in there and be nervous, but a mental illness might be that I can't even be bothered. I'll just stay home, I'll stay in bed, I'll stay quiet, and not even attempt to leave my home.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And it's funny because recently I was out in like a posh neighborhood and I felt like I had to stand up a little straighter, and it takes a lot. I was reading some articles where, especially for the Black community, it takes a lot. We don't see it, I think, because we're just going with emotions, but where like even race, how much it affects like us having to living while Black affects our mental health.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that there's a stigma, and I feel, again, within the Black community, a lot of us don't seek help because we think, well, if I say I have mental health issues, then that means I automatically have mental illness, and people are going to think I'm crazy, and they just want to seek the help. But we can sure benefit from it.
100%. And I think, to be quite honest, we all in this world have some kind of mental health challenge because this world is complex. Whether you're Black, whether you're white, or otherwise, we all have mental health challenges, but it's how we're able to address it so that we remain well.
So that brings me to, since this is where we're talking mental health, and that's why I really wanted to speak with you, the pandemic. We're and on top of just any day-to-day issues that we would have regularly had, we have this pandemic that this unprecedented circumstance that we're all living through, where for a while now, mind you, a lot of things are opening up. I think we're in phase 2 right now here in Ontario. But and so it feels like there's a sense of normalcy coming back into at play, but a lot of people are still anxious and obviously afraid, paranoid. There's financial instability happening right now. So what are some suggestions that you have for people who are, and there's a potential wave two that could happen. So what are some tips that you can give for people who are facing all of this anxiety?
Yeah, like, well, this is the thing, right? Phase two or not, I think a lot of people are having a really hard time. I do think that, people, when we're dealing with a mental health challenge or mental illness, it doesn't just go away like that. So just because things have started to open up doesn't mean that those who are really struggling with being in quarantine aren't still going to struggle now that phase two is happening. So I guess my very first advice is that people really need to check in with themselves. They need to, build an awareness around what's happening for them. Like, how are you feeling? How's your body feeling? Are you still oversleeping? Are you still under eating? Really looking at your mood, looking at how
or overeating,
or over, honey. The first 3 weeks.
Throw that one in there.
Yeah, like let's not lie about that, because the first 3 weeks, let me tell you, nachos and pizza and jerk, like it was my friend. But and I had to check myself and say, what is going on? Like, I'm overeating, and I'm someone who loves food, so I didn't catch it real quick. But when I did, I was like, no, this is getting ridiculous now, right? And it was me really calming the nerves that I was having regarding, like, what's going to happen next? Like, what do I do? Plus, also, I'm someone initially who didn't like working from home. So even trying to figure out a schedule.
A balance, yes.
Balance, oh my God, like I was dying. And so for me, luckily I was able to get out of, I guess, that funk for a little bit. And move into some of the things that I do highly recommend, which is number one, get your sleep in check. Because I think there's so many layers of why sleep is important for us. So both obviously for our physical health, it really helps to even address immune system issues. So it really helps our immune system become much more healthy. It helps the brain to function in the way it's supposed to. So you'll find that when you get proper sleep, even the cloudiness you might have in your mind, let's say you had like 5 hours, 4 or 3 hours sleep, it's not as bad when you're getting the amount of sleep that you're supposed to. Like, your body needs to reset. Even if we talk practically, if you're going to bed at like 12 o'clock in the morning and waking up at like 12 in the afternoon,
right,
your day is done. Your day is done. Right? And so how productive are you going to feel? Right. And then that plays into your emotions. And then you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm worthless. Like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing with myself? Right? Yeah. But there's this real cycle of like how it affects your body, but then how it affects your feelings and your emotions. And then like, what are you going to do with the rest of your day?
That's so true. I'm like, did you have a camera in here? Have you been watching me?
I have not been watching you.
Those are some feelings I've dealt with myself, and I didn't understand that that's where it came from, but that's so interesting to hear you say. Yeah.
I think people underestimate schedules, for instance, right? And being able to even leave and go outside to work or school or whatever. Like, routine and scheduling for us is like so key to the way in which we feel about ourselves, right?
Yes.
We feel like we're contributing to this world. We feel like, just like you've done something productive, and that feeling of productivity really enhances one's emotion.
It's true.
It could be small, it could be, and obviously I'm talking about those that are, in a pretty balanced place mentally. But those who are maybe, having a little harder time with their mental health concerns may need a little more push. But I will say still, the sleep is key. As well as obviously, like I had mentioned earlier, really building awareness around what's happening for you emotionally, mentally, your thought processes. So those are some things that I highly suggest. And I think, within the scheduling, goal setting, 1 to 3 goals a day, things like that. Continue to
take shower, eat breakfast.
Listen. No judgment. No judgment.
Some people are really like,
Yeah. It's been all of us.
oh man. The guilt. I feel like a lot of people have been feeling a lot of guilt about maybe not wanting to deal with all of it. Like just especially like the reason that question actually came to mind was personally, I know this, we started talking around the times where there's a lot of, you know, the protests and everything were happening following George Floyd, his unfortunate passing. And I was like, wow, like we're dealing with the pandemic, we're dealing with racial injustice, it's at an all-time high. And it's just like, sometimes I was like, should I feel guilty if I just want to shut it all down? Like, I don't want to have to deal with any of this. And I feel like maybe a lot of people feel the same way. Like, this is a lot.
It's too much, honestly. It's like, to say it's a lot is like totally an understatement. To say it's too much is also an understatement. It's just layer on layer on layer and layer, right? And the thing about it is, you know, some people are moving into all of these layers of crises, of grief, of trauma, with already having some complex mental health concerns.
Right.
And so and obviously working with some of them, you see how much it just sets them 10 steps back. You know, like if they were moving forward at some point in time within their mental health, this just allowed them to cocoon and say, you know what, let me just continue to isolate. You know, but what I found effective was if they had a really good community base, a good community around them, then that's allowed them to be a little more resilient. But I would say on a whole, this guilt please, first and foremost, to me, you deciding to unplug from social media, from the news, and or even from life for just a quick second, it's self-preservation. And to me, right? We need to be able to protect ourselves, right? We don't have to be in the thick of it all in order to feel informed. And the thing is, I think some people do it because their anxiety allows them to feel as though if, you know, if they're connected, if they know what's happening every day by the minute, then perhaps they could resolve what's going on, or they'll have a better idea of it.
Control it in a sense. It gives them more control.
Exactly. And really, it's a false sense of control because, you know, we cannot stop the pandemic. We cannot stop, you know, kind of how it affects a family member or whoever. Obviously, they have things in place like the mask and the social distancing. But the reality is the amount of control we really have over it is limited. And so what we can control is where we should try to put our focus. And some of that does mean I'm going to just shut off my phone for the whole day, or I'm going to, like, I just don't want to talk to anybody for the week. And that needs to be understandable. Like, I think everybody's going to address this in a different way that works for them. And it's okay to not be okay, right? Like, that's what we're saying. And I do realize that some people have a really hard time turning away from both the social media and or the news. And what I would suggest to them is, at least if you're going to do it, first of all, definitely don't do it before bed, right? Because we know how that could affect our night, how it could affect our dreams, or just being able to settle in general. Like, we don't want that interruption. But even, but I would suggest, like, if you're doing it, maybe schedule an hour or two out of the day that you watch the news, and that's it. And you just have to know your limits. Like, I like to talk about retain and release a lot of times. And for me, that really is about, like, retaining information and things that feed your mind, body, and soul. And release the things that are causing you pain, discomfort, and complacency. You know, I think it's really important that when we're checking our, you know, emotions and our mental well-being, that we're retaining what we should, knowing our limitations and releasing what we shouldn't. We gotta know what our limits are to protect ourselves, so that we can remain well and or get well. Because it's if we don't do it for ourselves, honestly, you know, we're just gonna have a much harder time, you know. And there are some of us that really cannot do it for ourselves, and that's where you start to reach out to your village or to your therapist or whoever it is, but connection is really, really important to get through this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this, like, seeing as I mentioned, like racial injustice, like how can we better take care of our mental health as it relates to racial injustice?
Yeah, so I think similar to addressing the pandemic, we first need to recognize what's happening for us, right? We as Black people are not a homogenous group, right? Like we're not all going to experience racism the same way.
Right.
We're not all going to feel it the same way. We're not all going to be as awakened to it the same way. And as a result, the way you feel about it is the way you feel about it. The way you react to it is the way you react to it. I don't think we should judge anybody for being angry and not being angry. You know what I mean? Because everybody's going to be at a different stage of this journey, which is fine and great. And my point is that regardless of where you are in that journey, that we do get to a place of healing, because regardless of systems changing, the effects of racism on our lives, the trauma that has caused for years and years on end, decades on end, is not going to just go away based on a system change either, right? Like,
and I want to take the opportunity, sorry to cut you off, but just to interject right there, because I remember reading an article and having my mind being like, what? Where it said like genetically, this stuff is passed down. So for anybody who thinks like, well, we didn't live through slavery and it's like ages and ages ago, and like you said, everybody's experience is different. But genetically, the anxiety and the stresses that our ancestors went through could actually be in you. So even if you don't feel like, well, I didn't live slavery, that trauma is still part of you, I guess, in a sense, which I thought was really interesting. But I don't know if I explained it properly, but that's what
no. That's fine. I totally understand what you're saying. Sometimes it's in our behavior, right? So it's not that, you know, you're gonna feel the whips of the slave and whatever, but what you are gonna possibly do is be in a room of, like, let's say white men, and feel intimidated right away. Because let's say, for instance, I have a Jamaican mom, and you know, she's comes here as an immigrant, and they're very much used to respecting a certain type of person, right? You know, they might stand up a little straighter, they might try to talk a little less patois, you know what I mean?
Right.
Some of that is a residue of generational trauma, is that we can't even be ourselves in front of certain individuals, because there's this way in which we're supposed to be in front of them that is going to be more accepting to them. So deny yourself to please them.
Yes, to make them comfortable. Yes.
So sometimes that's what.
I hate that.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's the imposter syndrome I was speaking about earlier, right? It's the idea that I have to speak a certain way, I have to look a certain way. Like, all these things are caused of generational trauma, like insecurities that were caused by, you know, not even seeing ourselves represented properly in the school system, right? Like
anywhere.
Or anywhere. Exactly. So it's very complex. It's a whole lot of things in one. And like I said, everybody's going to be in a different place of their experience, and that's okay. But it's very real. And I think people need, those that are experiencing it need to know that we see them, that we care for them, and we want to support them as best as we can, you know?
Yeah. And I want to just add there too, like, let's, because I love that you mentioned like we all experience it differently, and we're all at different phases in our journey. And it's very important for those who maybe feel that they're up here and there are some people who are still down here, not to, you know, kind of pound on the one that hasn't made it all the way just yet, because it doesn't help when we're all tearing each other down either.
100%. And I think we have to be okay with that, because I do see some people putting pressure on, you know, individuals to act a certain way or whatever. And it's like, but who says we have to act this way or that way? You know what I mean? Like I remember a client that I had one time, and she was very much into the activism scene, doing protests all this time, etc. And there's a point in time, because she has a lot of mental health concerns, and she said, you know, Simone, I'm done fighting. It's like, but I feel like if I stop fighting, I'm not going to be considered blackity black anymore. And I said, blackity black? Yeah. She's like, people are gonna like scorn me and say that I'm not doing enough, or that
Right.
I'm not really about the cause. And I'm like, my whole life has been about the cause, right? And to me, that was like a form of racial battle fatigue that she was experiencing. And I don't know if you've heard of that term, but it really is about carrying the burden, obviously, of racialized individuals, and
Right.
constantly thinking like you have to be the one to fight, but you don't have to be the one to
Mm.
fight. I think true healing can happen for individuals,
Mm-hmm.
if we're able to recognize what's happening for us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, right? And environmentally as well. So I'm very holistic in my care. And I think that all these pieces connected
Right.
affect our wellness overall.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned safe. Like, I think it's important. That's a key word when you're turning to somebody, that it be someone, a safe place, because not everyone is out here really,
Yeah.
rooting for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You have to recognize that. You have to recognize, like, okay, well, when I'm around these people, I feel like, when I'm around these
Exactly.
people, I actually feel like I'm blossoming. I'm my best self. I can be honest. I can be transparent.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
important too.
100%.
Circling it back to the pandemic, my last question is, they're talking about, again, I mentioned before, that sense of, it feels like there's a sense of normalcy, things are opening back up, but you're hearing about, this is more so in the US, but increasing cases, and here too there's increasing cases daily. We don't know what's going to happen. They say there's a second wave. We don't know if that means there's going to be a second set of a quarantine or lockdown. So how can we take care of our mental health, um, and there's also the people we mentioned that still aren't coming outside because there's a sense of
Yeah.
paranoia and anxiety. How can we take care of our mental health, not only living through this pandemic, but cabin fever, being stuck inside, you know, maybe stuck inside with people you can't stand very much.
Yeah.
Let's keep it
Yeah.
real. It's happened to a lot of people.
No, absolutely. I think what's funny about your last comment there, is that if people's relationship was being tested, it's now, right? I'm someone that really thinks that attachment theory is important to understand for ourselves, because it really talks about our connections to one another, how it affects us. It's like, where's our security and trust, right, in relationships, because those honestly make us thrive, and or they make us kind of,
Shrivel and die.
yeah, yeah, sure.
For a better word, it's
Yes, yes, and not to be like all dark or whatnot, but people say, like, from the cradle to the grave, honestly, our connections, if they're not positive, right, they
yes,
really can either allow babies to pass, or like, people to commit suicide and whatnot.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's a really serious thing. And so I think what to say about that, I think I did mention some of it earlier, but I think the first thing is to really check to see where you're at, and recognize whether things like your mood is constantly on a high or a low, that you're responding in ways that's not normal for you. Again, the appetite is a big thing, the sleep interruption is a big thing. Even the way we're taking care of our hygiene, and I know especially in the Caribbean culture,
Mm-hmm.
like, if you don't bathe for one day, is a problem, right? So even for some, so for some of us, some of us, they'll shower 2 times a day. If you
Right.
notice, you're maybe showering 1 time a day. For some cultures, that might not be a big deal, but for some cultures, it might be a big deal.
Yeah, it means something's happening
It
here. What do
means
you mean you
something's
only
happening.
showered once?
Right. So being able to check off those boxes, like, what's happening for me, my mood, my sleep, my hygiene, my interactions with people as well. Am I even motivated to connect with people now that things open?
Mm.
Like, what's that about?
Yes.
Right. And to me, it's okay to be cautious, because to be quite honest, even for myself, I don't plan to go to any restaurants anytime soon, but I absolutely plan to, and I'm
Right.
still connecting with family, as an example. So connecting, really recognizing what our patterns are there, like our irritability. I think that's the first step for everybody. Just really
Mm.
recognizing what's happening for you, mind, body, soul, socially, um, and ensuring that you're trying to meet your needs, like your needs, not like, and not
like I really need that pair of sneakers needs.
Exactly.
Not that
So,
one.
exactly. So, and I like to call it informed wants. So it's really knowing what we need, based on like recognizing who we are, like authentically who we are, what's happening for us. So, as an example, I am an extrovert, and so I need to connect with people. But if I'm not able to, or I feel like stuck to do so, perhaps there's more going on with me. It's a very simple example, very vague a little bit too, but I just think we need to know what our needs truly are based on knowing who we are, right? And so that we can inform them versus I'm bored, so I'm gonna have some ice cream, which is
Right.
common sometimes for me.
I love
um, yeah,
I
like
just want to point out why I laugh, because I'm like, wow, a lot of people are going to realize that they don't know who they are.
yeah, like I think if there's one thing about my practice, Agapé Lens, is that I'm all about people really recognizing who their authentic self is. Because when you recognize who you are, nobody could take that away from you.
Absolutely.
Because it allows you to navigate this world in a very, very different way. And so for me, when I talk about self-care, even, it's not about just the bubble bath, and nothing's wrong with that. But the thing is, what's the long-term effects of the bubble bath versus, you know what I'm saying? Versus,
Right. There's only so many bubble baths you could take too. Like,
there's only so many bubble baths you could take. So it's really recognizing like what are my needs, and who am I that I crave like a certain kind of need, whether it's through people or for myself. And as a result of that, you're able to respond to it in a way that is healthy. And sometimes we need the help of others to do so. I'm not saying for people to do it on their own, but I do think being able to do some of that work is important. So journaling, right? It has been really helpful for individuals, even just talking it out again with a safe person. Finding a community that you really feel like you could belong and kind of release some of what's happening inside. Because I don't think we should do this all on our own.
no.
Yeah, so those are some tips I think that I would really suggest for people. Get to know yourself, get comfortable with your thoughts if you can, right? Because if trauma's in the way, then it might be a little harder. But if you're in a balanced kind of place emotionally, mentally, getting okay with stillness time. You know what I mean? Whether it's through prayer, journaling, meditation, whatever it is that you do, like just really getting comfortable with yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, and finding ways to first address that, so that it's not swept under the rug or being suppressed. Like just really understanding what's happening for us, who we are, and moving forward. And the thing is, I don't think the goal of even mental health is for people to be happy all the day long.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, go on with that.
Yeah, but it's more that, you're feeling like you can manage day to day. You're feeling at least content, or you're feeling as though, like even when rough patches come along, or a pandemic, or racism is in your face, that you can problem solve through this. You can push your way through this, in a way that's positive and healthy. So not just, again, glossing over it or creating band-aid solutions, but able to really reflect on like what's happening for me, what do I need right now, and being okay with that, right?
Yes. And that's why we're having that's why I wanted to have this conversation. We said this check-in so we can, touch on different bases and give people a different perspective maybe, and some hope and some tips to help them through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thank you so much for bringing me on. I think this check-in was not just helpful for you, but it was also helpful for me because, again, sometimes you get in discussion and you're like, you know what, like either you feel like you've come a long way, or like maybe there's areas that I do still need to check in on. Mental health is very real, and it's got to be as important as our physical health.
Absolutely.
As spiritual health. It's got to be just as important.
Yeah. And and that's the takeaway. I really hope people like take that. If anything, if you take anything today, take that is just as important. There's no stigma, like, although there's stigma attached, but it's part of life. Like it's just like you said, the physical, the mental, they both got to be here. You want them to be here.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you know what I mean. I want it to be here, and I'm like, wait, do we want it to be here? What am I scaling it on? But yeah,
you want it balanced, yes.
Silly sometimes, but yes, thank you, Simone, for joining me today, for joining us, for sharing your expertise. And I will be posting all of Simone's information in the description box below. So be sure to, if you're in the GTA area, is it safe to say the GTA area? In the GTA area, you can contact Simone if you want to, if you have any further questions, and she can respond to you. And on that note, I bid you adieu.
Thank you again. Thank you again for even creating this platform for us to discuss, for us to retain and release ourselves.
Yes.
And I do hope the audience also is able to retain and release. And, you know, these conversations will continue happening. It's healthy to have them. So
yes.
I thank you again so much for bringing light to this very, very important conversation.
Thank you.